We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, this is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today I have some guests that you may have seen before. Pete Hegseth spends a lot of time on our television at Fox News, doing Fox and Friends on the weekends and with special assignments during the week as well, maybe more than that I'm not familiar with. And David Goodwin, who is the editor of the Classical Journal and
Classical Difference, yep.
Classical Difference, I'm sorry, and is the president of the Association of Classical and Christian Schools, an organization that I know a bit about because I served on the board of it for 22 years, and David and I probably overlapped as board members at least 10 of those years, and so we got to know each other quite well. Gentlemen, welcome.
It's good to see you again, Myron.
Great to see you.
I am excited, David, to interview you in the future about the things that around the history of ACCS and other things that are going on currently. But I got to tell you guys, I was blown away with a fact I learned this morning. I had updated my notes as of late last week about where the book stood, and I'll introduce that book in just a minute. But right now, you all are the authors of the #1 book for the last week, beginning on June 19, in nonfiction on Amazon, and I understand also the #1 seller on the New York Times bestseller list. That's incredible.
Well,
we're blessed.
Thank God we're blessed indeed. Yeah, it's and I'll say the New York Times did not want to do that, Marlon. They really did not. And David and I both knew we had to blow it out of the water if they were going to acknowledge that we had the top selling book. We are just grateful.
Yeah, that is remarkable. The book, of course, is called Battle for the American Mind. And it looks like this. We are grateful. I would have probably had the whole thing read if you'd have sent me a review copy, but I had to buy this one. You guys are really tight, man. No, I'm teasing you. I have had a chance to see all 5 episodes of the documentary related called Miseducation of America, and have not had a chance to read all of this, but my wife jumped into it and gave me a little tidbit I'm going to ask you about in a minute. But tell me, what are both trying to do? What are you trying to do with this initiative?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the two of you. This initiative is about what you guys have done and what the classical Christian movement is. I mean, that's when we started working together, David and I, that was the goal from the beginning. I mean, first to glorify God through this work, and that is truly what we want to do. But second of all, to elevate what classical Christian is and expose more people to it and break down misconceptions and hopefully help, put one more shoulder to the plow in that movement so that more people and kids and their grandkids are exposed to the absolute wisdom and beauty that is classical Christian education. So without what you guys have done at ACCS and others, 30, 40 years ago, by planting and creating and building and growing these schools, none of this is possible. So this book is simply, we hope, part of the next chapter of raising, to use a word of the left, raising awareness around what it is so that parents will look for it and choose it. So the film, that was the goal. And the book, which came in, after the film, but was in partnership with the film, it was all part of that effort. And I can't thank David enough. I mean, without David, this doesn't happen. He's the brains behind it, and he knows it back to front. And I'm coming at this much more recently as a parent and trying to explain it in a way that our viewers and others will want to access what classical Christian's all about. But the goal was, we've been open about it. Yes, it's problem identification. Like, we got a big problem on our hands here, and it's 100 years old, and here's what it is. But that's why we spend so much time in the book in part 3 saying, and here is the solution. Like, this is what it looks like. This is why it matters. And we are unabashed in making the case for it.
Yeah, that is incredible. I was fascinated by a number of things. One of the things that came out that my wife tagged for me in the book so that I would be able to read a portion of it was the connection of deism and it producing fertile ground for what you have found objectionable in the progressive approach that is far deeper. So before we jump into the elements of progressivism that have been what you're addressing, tell me how deism makes that, catalyzes that, if you will.
Well, I think I'll just jump on this one a little bit. The idea I had, and Pete says this in several of the interviews and in the book, that we get our history from the progressives. So we basically believe, a lot of what we believe is what they told us. And one of the things I believed was that deism was sort of a neutral ground that the founding fathers had come up with to sort of make, make everyone welcome or some such thing. But when we started work on this, when I was looking at the work of Lawrence Crimmen, who was the basis of a lot of the source in this book, deism was more than that. It was really an intentional shift away from Jesus Christ. It was meant to say, we don't want to accept the truth of the Bible or any of the truth tenets of Christianity as givens. We're going to strip those out of our paideia, as we refer to it in the book, and we're going to replace it with something of a toothless God, this deistic God who doesn't really have anything to say, because he doesn't have a Bible, and he doesn't really have anything to do because Jesus Christ doesn't come in that schema. So basically it strips away the essential meat and center core of the American paideia at that point.
Yeah.
It took years to get there, but that was the basis of it.
Did Patrick Henry and John Jay and others that would have shared biblical faith in this process not see that as a concern, or was it simply building consensus around something and they needed to let it go at that point?
Yeah, I think there was a nexus, and we talk about this in the book. We actually list out various founding fathers in there. There was a nexus of people, and a lot of us have read the Federalist Papers. There's, of course, also the Anti-Federalist Papers, which few of us do read. There was a lot of debate and contention. This is why, Franklin, when he left the famed Constitutional Hall, I think is where he was, where he said, "It's a republic if you can keep it." That it was a battle, and everybody had to give up something. Yeah. The Enlightenment gave us deism in people like Thomas Jefferson and Madison, and then there's John Jay and Patrick Henry and Governor Morris and a few others who were strong Christians, but everybody got something. That's why we got the 10 amendments to the Constitution, was the restrictive influences of Christians who said government is dangerous, we need to contain it.
Right. So let's bring this into the here and now. What were some of the things that it could go without saying, but let's say it. But what were some of the things happening in America that inspired you to write the book? Why today?
Besides everything.
Hey, I'm starting somewhere.
Besides everything, I've always been passionate about education. I was a public school kid. My dad was a public school teacher. I assumed my kids would go to public school as recently as 5-6 years ago. And because I felt like there was a bias, but the experience of school, of sports, of kind of the Americana was something I wanted my kids to have. Good enough for me, good enough for them. And then more of it started to trickle out. I was introduced to classical Christian classical Christian schools through a school in Minnesota, and then through meeting David. It just became clear. I didn't, for me at least, and David's been at this much longer, and please add to this, David. For me, it was kind of a light bulb went off that not only are we doing this wrong, but there is a solution out there, and it's growing, and it's something not only my kids can access, but hundreds of thousands and hopefully millions of kids can access eventually. And it's the key to saving our country. Yeah. And it wasn't we call it the COVID-16-19 moment at the beginning of the book, this moment when the classroom came home and parents were seeing it, and, our founding date is being changed and gender pronouns are being assigned to, 8-year-olds. And they said, whoa, where in the world did this come from? That moment happened while we were writing the book. So the book and the film were conceived before that. And then as we're writing it, it's like, we can't write this stuff down fast enough of the modern manifestations. And the way I've described it is the way Ernest Hemingway described it, which is he was talking about bankruptcy, but he was saying things happen gradually until they happen suddenly. And that I feel like applies to this timeline, 100-year progressive takeover. It was all very gradual, much of it under the surface. Only a few people noticed. If only a few people did anything about it. And now it's in front of everybody, and they're looking for an alternative.
David, you want to add to that?
Well, the only thing I would add is just the providential admixture. I mean, God obviously had the biggest hand to play in this. When Pete and I started, just as he said, we were working on a much smaller project. And when we get to this book, how did it, get to New York Times #1? It got there because the culture was ready for it, and that was purely outside of our hands. Pete is Pete's the real deal. He really believes in it, which is something you don't see very often in people who are, on TV and get some attention. And so I think his passion has just shown through in the publicity that's happened. And that is, there's a lot of marketing that is not genuine. And I think the genuine belief is what has carried it. And so what could have foretold that kind of a 1, 2, 3 factor other than the hand of God?
Oh, amen. And David's research, and then the cool part is it's not about selling books. When people engage with it, they're diving in, and the response, David, I can't wait to talk to you soon. I'm going to see you soon and we'll chat about this, but the response from educators who I've been a public school teacher for 30 years, has been overwhelming. As they say, I had no idea. I've been seeing what's on the surface, and it's been changing for years, and I had no idea the undercurrent and where that came from. You've blown my mind and totally changed the way I view education. That's pretty edifying for just a couple of dudes who, we admit at the beginning, we're probably the least qualified to write this book. Well, David is. At least I am the least qualified.
No, we're the least qualified.
But we're just
Marlon knows me, so
I don't know Pete well enough yet, but David, you're not the least qualified. How did you all meet? How did it come together?
I'll take this one real quick. We tell the story a little bit in the book, but I was at a Fox and Friends diner in North Carolina, Carthage, North Carolina, and a beautiful young couple was sitting at a table with their 2 young daughters in uniforms. And I went over to talk to them, and it turns out they went to the Sandhills Classical Christian School there. Yep. And they were about to go to school, and her name is Amitha, and she's a board member there now. I think she's the chairman of the board, but she just went on and on about this amazing school and how great it was. And I had been exposed to classical Christian, and I knew what it was, but she just said, you gotta, and we were hitting it off and talking about it. And then she said, you gotta talk to this David Goodwin, and we're a part of the Association of Classical Christian Schools. So she connected me over email, gave me David's email, and I just cold reached out and said, hey, she said you're awesome, and I'd love to learn more and tell me about it. And, David had done a lot of the research already about especially the Christian side of it and the progressive takeover in the early 20th century. He started sharing that information with me. I had questions, he had answers. We kept pinging back and forth. And then I just remember a moment, I turned to my wife here in the house. I said, babe, we got to tell this story. The Gary plan, the Bellamy salute, like this stuff is unbelievable. How do I not know this? And another secret story of it is without her and a few other people at Fox Nation, this project never gets off the ground, because it still was a moment where it was like, education, is that, is that really that sexy of a topic? And it turns out 2 years later, providentially, it's front and center for everybody. But David had already done the work, and we were direct. It really was the hand of God, and to 2 humble souls. And David was no better person to work with, and it's been an absolute joy. I learned something every time.
If I could just add though, real quick, Marlon, again, in the providential context, my work largely dealt with early 20th century, and Pete being, Pete doesn't talk about it a lot, but he's a pretty well-educated guy, and especially in government and politics, and he has a lot of background there, and he carried the story from the 1950s forward, and really, I don't think it would have landed the way it did, because it really makes sense out of things like critical race theory, critical theory, all of that, just simply because he picked up where I left off and carried it all the way forward. So it's a good collaborative work.
Yeah, there are so many directions to take this. I want to make one statement before I come back to a question. And that is, I want our listeners to appreciate this because I am absolutely convinced of its truth. By college, where most of the conversation has hit us with the real influence that college has been, but by college, for our children, it is, in a word, too late. If we haven't given them the kind of education that we're talking about prior to that, they don't, they won't, they can't, they will not have the grounding that they need to be effective there. It just, I hear it all the time, people want to, and it's too late. Can you list for me the progressive issues by category, as if to bullet point them, that you really have been able to identify and articulate the problems for in the book?
I'll take a quick stab at it. When you meet all of the characters over 100 years ago, some of which knew each other, many of which did know each other, some of which didn't. But when you start to list the attributes of the characters who started to reshape school and focus on education, to a man and to a woman, almost universally, they are atheists, socialists, humanists, and eventually Marxists. So this is a battle for the American mind between a very distinct ideology that rejects God, that rejects the West, that rejects the human condition. So it actually is much more simple to understand. It's a simple set of parameters in that sense. Like, it really is as big and as deep as you think it is. Now, it manifests today as things like, equity. Equity is the new word they use, which is effectively a Marxist. It's the latest manifestation of the Marxist view of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and we level it all out, and the class warfare used in a racial context in America. But you'll meet a lot of the familiar characterizations that we thought were confined to academia or the fringes of a political party. And you'll realize they've been at the center of remaking the educational architecture in our country from the very beginning.
It sometimes, when we identify who we're opposed to, our enemy, it is easy to categorize them as all black and us as all white, to give a bit of a metaphor or a description to it. Is it that simple here? Were they meeting in clandestine environments, being strategic, thinking it out, and finally executing it in subtle but clever ways? Or is it a little messier than that, as is typically the case?
Go ahead, David.
It's a little bit of both. It was conceived collectively, so I don't think you call that a conspiracy. It was conceived collectively by a group of progressives that were real activists. About 1915, John Dewey being the one who led the educational front. There were, of course, others in the mix, but it was not hidden. It was out in the open. If you think about it, when a movement first gets underway, they publish magazines that they don't think anyone's going to read but themselves. And so the way I found out about this is I actually, without any metaphor involved, knocked the dust off, and it was quite a pile of a bunch of new republics in the first part of the 20th century. And I think the librarian had to clean up after I left, but the story's all there. It's just told in dialogue as they go back and forth. They wrote it down, I suppose, in a time when there wasn't Twitter and email. They wrote it down in magazine pages. We can go find it.
Yeah, and it was also, I agree with what David said. It is a little bit of both, but that's why we don't call it a conspiracy in the book, right, per se.
Yeah.
But what they ultimately also always dressed it up as something more benign. So it was always this shift in education is because of a need for more vocational training or an industrial economy. So there was always an activist class that, of course, added another element or variable to it. And that's what they openly debated, is how do we use step one to get to step two? And step one always seemed publicly a lot more benign or beneficial to the economy or the country. And so there's a sleight of hand there, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, it's, as I think my knowledge of John Dewey was in education, he was applying his school of philosophy, pragmatism to it, and interested in making better citizens, at least according to the common reading, and helping people be educated to get a good job. And what you're saying is it's a whole lot deeper than that. Where would we easily, I suspect the book is naturally footnoted, and you're referring to sources that would be available to people. How much does the book get into the detail of these kinds of things and when they played out and what impact they've had now as it's happened much faster? COVID provided some acceleration. I think it emboldened people. I do not understand what's going on with a place like Portland where they don't enforce the law. And all of these kinds of things seem to be connected in ways that are hard for me to, quite honestly, put a narrative around. Can you help?
Yeah, I mean, they had to, you mentioned improve civic life, or Dewey pragmatism, and that idea, which again was part of the rationale for, and you had immigrants coming from different countries, and how do you unite them if they're not Christian? You got Christians and Catholics, and so there was always a rationale. But the focus at its center point, and David's right, they wrote about it openly in the New Republic and other publications, was we have to get the immovable object out of the way, which is God, which is objective truth. And if you can get rid of that, then everything else becomes possible through the way you advocate for social change. And our argument, and it's backed up through what they said, and then new schools that they opened, was they used a forgery. They effectively, David came up with this idea of the pressure plate. You've got treasure on a pressure plate, and if you take it off, you've got to immediately replace it with something else, or else the alarm's going to go off. Well, if you took God out of the schools right away, the cultural alarms of the early 20th century would have gone on in communities and with parents. So first, it was a pull-out period where you do religious instruction off-site, and this was a new sort of type of school called the Gary Plan and others where they used that. And then you had to replace it with something else that people revered. And in this particular case, it was a flag and a pledge. And a pledge written by a socialist that did not say "under God" when it was first written. Right. That was added later on. So in simple terms, basically the cross and the Bible were replaced in the front of the classroom with the flag and the pledge, and which I revere as a patriot and a conservative today, but the left always used as a placeholder. And now they're happy to get rid of it. I mean, from Howard's End to the 1619 Project, America's an evil place, not only not worthy of reverence, but to be rejected. That whole pipeline, it's not that John Dewey sought that outcome when he started this in the early 20th century. They didn't know where it would lead, but they knew where it wouldn't lead. And it wouldn't lead back to biblical wisdom, God in the classroom, or reverence for our founding ideals. And so it's more what they were against. And you see that in the emergence of critical theory in the 1930s at the Frankfurt School at Columbia University, the most prominent teachers college in America. The whole premise of critical theory is to deconstruct the patriarchy and the hierarchy of Western civilization. And when you do that, you reveal other forms of justice. So they were at it, and they were open about it.
Wow, that is really well put, and that helps me understand. Sometimes we set out on paths, we don't know where they're going, but we know where we don't want them to go, and we've been able to safeguard from that and make progress. I
think, Marlon, Dewey kind of gets off the hook easily because his pinnacle work that most people cite is On Education. That's the title of it, simple thing. In the early, I think, late 20s, he wrote it. And it is a little more neutral. But if you go back to his original work in 1899, School and Society, that's when he first targets school as a social instrument by which the progressives can take control of the society and move it where they want to move it. And then later in the 1930s, he signs on to the Humanist Manifesto, which of course is quite direct in what it's trying to achieve in our society. So I think we just have to rethink Dewey based on the evidence rather than on what he told us we should think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it is to be commended to be so strategic and so long term, but to be strategic and to be long term and to be under the authority of Scripture and in the context of what we know to be truth has a whole different impact. Unfortunately, today we tend to rely on the truth of what we know and not to be as strategic as we ought to be. And I think it's time for us to really think in the long term. I get frustrated about that, David. You and I were involved in a strategic planning that talked about that very thing many years ago, and I've seen some good fruit from that kind of thinking. And I think it's time for more of it. What would you hope we might see happen in a 5 to 10 year time frame as a result of your book? We're recording this right in the wake of some interesting Supreme Court rulings. Roe versus Wade has just been set aside. That's the beginning of something that could be very good. I've recently become aware that Arizona and Maine now have vouchers available for education that can be Christian education. What do you think? What do you dream for? What do you pray for? What might be the case 5 to 10 years from now as a result of the influence of your book and other things like that?
Well, our book would only be a small piece of that, but we dedicated the book at the beginning to the parents who pioneered a classical Christian renewal now 40 years on. And one of the things I'm encouraged by, we talk about an educational insurgency inside the book, that in a military context, the first thing we have to do is tactically retreat from government schools, because at least in our immediacy, they're not salvageable right now for the kids in them right now. That we hope to change that, and that's part of the plan that we lay out, but retreat. And then we lay out 3 phases, Mao's 3 phases of insurgency that we studied in the military, and where we are in that. And I would argue we're 40 years into an insurgency, thanks to the work of you two gentlemen and so many others who have been building a network of schools that, as David points out, was completely buried in the 1970s. And they tried to outlaw homeschooling as well, and most forms of private schooling. So our darkest days were actually behind us in the idea of us building an infrastructure to change the educational system. So I would argue we might be 40 years into 100 years of our own take back because of what you guys have built. Now we're in middle of phase 1. This is raise alarm bells, raise awareness. Parents need to know that it's out there. We need to break down the assumption of public school, the default of public school. I mean, what the unions did during COVID was massively important in exposing what they really represent and what they really stand for. So to use a term of the left, which I've already mentioned, I mean, this is raising awareness. This is what we hope to do. Engage with the book and engage with the content and take off the rose-colored glasses about your public school. It's not somebody else's school. It's not the school. It's your school. It's my school. It's all of these institutions that we once revered. We need to break down that view. So I hope in 10 years, classical Christian schools have exploded. They've been planted. They're in even more communities, vastly more communities than they are right now. That homeschooling and online schooling is exploding to the point where unions and public educators start to take notice. They won't be immediately under threat when you look at the size and scope of government schools. I mean, I don't know, what is it, David? We talk about it. The largest army in the world is driven by school bus drivers in yellow school buses. I mean, it dwarfs the size of any other state-run institution. So get to the point where they're noticing it and they're saying, we've got a problem here, but we've got the benefit of kind of being under the radar at some level. I mean, yeah, we may be New York Times #1, but there's still only a certain section of the public that's engaging with this content. And we want to broaden and broaden and broaden that. And then school choice is I mean, what a week in the Supreme Court for all the things that we care about. And in Maine now, you can use those vouchers to go to religious institutions as well. Arizona just passed a bill, $7,000 a parent, right. No income threshold to go to any school of your choosing in Arizona. I mean, that's a dream. It almost feels like it wasn't possible 10 years ago. So if you combine that And that's where I think, and you guys are going to have a better opinion of this than me. I come at this as just a zealot who would love to do everything right away. That kind of money creates an opportunity for more institutions to be built, classical Christian schools. As long as the dollars are following the parents and not coming from the government with strings attached, you can now meet that demand with new institutions where the tuition money is effectively built in at some level, at least at a minimum level. Man, there's an opportunity there. So I hope this is just the beginning, but we did not start this. This is fully in recognition of what gentlemen like you have been doing for decades that I think has a chance to really bear fruit. And we don't have to be at the size of the public system in 10 years or in 150 years. You just need to produce 3, 4, 5%, 6% of graduates in this country who really get it. That's always been the world changers.
That percentage doesn't surprise me because it doesn't take, what it takes is effective leadership, and it comes out of that kind of percentage easily. Yeah. There's been a fear that if the money comes from tax-related organizations like the state or the federal government, that he who takes the king's gold becomes the king's man over long term. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a box trap you and I have talked about many times, Marlon, and we've got to watch out for it. I mean, if we cluster all the schools, private schools in under a government program, and then they suddenly say that you have to start doing things their way, or they're going to drop the trap on you, we're going to be in trouble. So I'm going to botch it, and I'll leave this to Pete, but I think there's a military saying that strategy goes out the window when the first shot's fired or something like that. I think we're going to have all kinds of changes in the environment coming up. What we were trying to do, and this project, I'm so blessed to have been part of it. We were trying to let people know that this is a category. It's a thing. It's not just a variation or a niche thing for a weird form of Christian education. It's its own thing, and I think we've made that point. I hope it resonates with people.
Absolutely right. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. Is exactly right.
That's the phrase. Yeah.
But I mean, we seeing the tilt, and listen, the court can change. I mean, the way you watch the thing swing back 2-3 seats in a decade, and all of these things are poof. I mean, that's the scary part of. And when you look at the types of lawyers we're pumping out of so-called elite law schools, I mean, they're loony bins. They're complete. No, they are.
I'm laughing because it's so hard to believe some of the things that our revered institutions have bought into.
Absolutely. So that's why the central point is build your own schools that don't rely on the king's gold. And at the core, and build a demand and an outcrying that makes David's job really hard, so that he has to figure out how to build more schools and accreditate more schools because the demand is so robust. Yeah. That's the core strategy. We can't rely on educational tax credits or school choice. We've tried that for decades. That's basically been the Republican talking point for like 30 years to no avail. And if you have a choice to go from one woke school to another slightly less woke school, that's not really a good choice. We're trying to make the counter argument. Yeah, you know this.
But it is a hard thing for most parents to pay for education twice.
Yes.
Once with their tax dollars and another with their after-tax disposable income. And it has held back private education in many respects. Maybe this event, your book, the conversations around it, will inspire some of the benevolence available from very wealthy Christian circles in America to see opportunity there too. I know that's been part of the conversation as well. Mm-hmm. Because I'll tell you what, there's nothing that breaks my heart more than to not be able to see somebody get this education that will do everything that they can, but just can't afford it. I can't tell you how many times my wife, who's my business partner at Veritas Press, has come home and said, we're going to give them tuition. She's not asking. You got to tell me. And I know who's boss when it comes to that. We had a situation during COVID where somebody realized that a single mother in New York City working 2 jobs realized that they had to have they had gotten a hold of our stuff. They said, I have to have this for my kids, but I don't know how to do it. I'm going to have to get a third job probably. My wife said, we're giving it to them. And we can't do that everywhere. And the bottom line is money will hold us back if we're not careful, because we got to pay teachers. You got to have facilities in most instances, or technology, however you do it. And what you've done is exposed it. I don't know what it's going to take to get people to leave the public schools, but these public schools are government-run schools, and they're not doing us any favors. And what you've gotten a hold of here is a tiger by the tail that I hope really unleashes some things that are very needed. Thank you so much for what you've done.
Well, thank you for getting us to this point.
I do have a very serious closing question. Tell us about your NASCAR racing experience.
It was on my bucket list, and we were able to do it. By the way, you can do it, Marlon. You know that.
Is that right?
Yes. This is a real thing. It's NASCAR racing experience. It's at pretty much any NASCAR track. You know, you throw down whatever amount of money for a certain amount of minutes. And I'm telling you, I can't believe they do it. And I hope the lawyers never get a hold of it, because you get in there, you show them your driver's license. They show you a 20-minute video. And then they strap you in a real NASCAR, and you get to drive around the track. And if you pay, some exorbitant amount of money, you can do 30 minutes or whatever. And there is a governor on it, so they try to keep you under a certain. But I went 155 miles an hour in a NASCAR around the Daytona 500 Super Speedway, and there's no one else in the car. There's no robot controlling it. It's you on the gas all the way on the side. And the only thing they say is, it's. Make sure you don't slow down in the corners. And so you're flying at the corner, and it looks like this, Yeah. Like, I'm supposed to, and they said, and so you accelerate through that turn, and you feel the G forces. And I just thought, there's no way I'm qualified for this. This is entirely unsafe. And I got to do it for Fox and Friends. It was super cool. I think you should do it. It was worth it.
I get near Daytona. You sold me. I got a kid that lives near there. We're going to go do it.
Do it. There's a website. Check it out. You go out there. It's loads of fun, and you pay for the additional, 10 minutes if you can, because it's worth it. It takes you a while to figure out you can actually do it.
Well, back to the topic at hand, guys. I know we need to close this. I really believe what you've done has been a boost that classical education has needed at the right time. And I think we will see this take things to a whole new level. So thank you for your tenacity and your work and your forward thinking about how to communicate it, not only the problem, but the solution. This is great stuff. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon.
Folks, this is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Thank you for joining us with Pete Hegseth and David Goodwin. And go get the book, Battle for the American Mind. It is important and timely, and something we've got to pay attention to. God bless you all.